Hey everybody, Brendan here, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be continuing our London system speedrun. They played knight f6, so we will start with knight f3. Why not? It's a good move. And bishop to f4. Here we go. So with this type of structure, I think we're just going to play things normally with e3. And we'll even allow a trade here. Not too concerned. If they end up playing queen takes d6, I actually kind of want to play c3 just to avoid any queen b4 nonsense. And yeah, it looks like we're just going to be developing our pieces quite normally here. There's not really a significant advantage to speak of. However, there are some things in our benefit, mainly the fact that this bishop is kind of out of play for the moment. However, if they're able to play e5, that story could change. But it also might not. For example, if I play bishop d3, they play e5, we could actually try trading everything and then playing h3. Now that they're going for c5, it's unlikely they're going to do both. Otherwise, if they end up doing that, they'll end up with an isolated pawn. So that is something I'm totally fine with. So I'll just castle here. And who has the better minor piece? It is us. We have a light square bishop, whereas they have pawns on dark squares, or light squares. And since they have a light square bishop as well, their pawns are on the same color square, which is not so great. Here, we're just going to maneuver our knight to the d4 square. I don't see a reason not to do this. We'll just take, and then we'll go knight to f3, and bring the knight to d4. We want to avoid any silly business. For example, bishop g4 at some point could be annoying. It doesn't quite work right now. And here, I don't believe we're scared. We can just go for knight to d4. If they go bishop g4, we can just move out of the way. I'm not really too upset about that. It would be nice to play h3 if we can. But we have to be a little bit careful. We don't want to blunder into anything. f3 is fine as well, by the way. It does create a backward pawn for us. Maybe not a backward pawn, but just a pawn that was previously very, very good. Here I'll just go queen to f3, just improve the pieces ever so slightly. This is just preparing for anything like knight g4 or bishop g4, where I can just play moves like queen to g3 now. And I'm never scared of knight to e4. If they end up doing that and we take, our knight is still very, very good, whereas their bishop against our knight is not really as good, one can say. Yeah, we're not really interested in taking that bishop. We definitely could, but I don't think it's the best idea. Instead, bishop to f5 is quite interesting, with the idea that after takes and takes, if queen g6, we have knight e7, and, well, if queen h5, we do have checkmate. However, I don't think that this is necessary to do, so I would rather just improve the position. And how can we do that? I like this move here, a4. Just going for extra space with a5. If they end up going a5 themselves, we do get this b5 square, which is quite nice. And here they're allowing us to play a5, which is quite cool. We're fixing more pawns on the light squares. They could always try bringing this rook over to b8 and playing for something like b6 or b5. I think that's decent. Here, I'm not quite sure what their idea is. Maybe it's involved with a trick here. So if I go queen h4, there is g5, and as you're seeing, there's no easy squares to find for the queen. So that's a nice little trick there, but we can just always move over to f3, and the trick has been avoided. If they end up just moving back, we'll just play h3. Normal improving moves are always kind of a good thing here. h3 is definitely a good inclusion. There's no sacrifices. Our pieces are too well developed. Yeah, there's no threat here. So I'm not quite sure what the plan is here. We could always go for something like queen to f4. I actually quite like this move. And this is trying to encourage a queen trade, and after takes, we can play moves like g3. Or if they play knight f5, we can just play f5 there. And really just try to play against this light square bishop. I really like this move, queen to f4. It's very interesting. And I don't see a good way for them to avoid this. Now, of course, one thing to mention is we would like to play g3 instead, but if they play knight h5, we do not have the opportunity. We have to play f5, but it's not really such a bad deal. Playing f5, even though it does put a pawn on a light square, it restricts their bishop in a way that's very uncomfortable. Now, I like playing the move rook to e1. I also like g4 quite a bit as well. I don't think that this is a bad move by any means. There is also h4, but I do like having one pawn on the light squares. So if we go king h2 and then g3, this is a totally fine setup. But then our king is kind of stuck to defend that pawn, even if we go king g2 or something after. Whereas if we go h4, now we don't really have those responsibilities. We can end up going g3. And it's unclear where this bishop's going to find a ton of useful activity. That's important to distinguish there. Yeah, I don't really see it being too useful. So h4 looks like the right call. Just gaining a little bit more space. We'll be able to follow up with g3 next. And moves like rook to e1. I'm not in a rush to play rook to e1. There's not really a necessity for it. Yeah, so this, I'm just going to continue improving my pieces. Rook to e1 now. This doesn't really have any threats involved with it. Okay, and I will go rook to e2. Just continually improving the pieces. I would like to keep some pieces on the board here. Primarily the minor pieces if I can do it. And that looks like a very likely scenario here. So I think my next goal is just to target the d5 pawn. Do I need to keep rooks on? I don't need to, but it's very, very awkward. Actually, yeah, no, I kind of have to go into this trade. But that's an okay trade, so that's fine. Now, what I want to do is I think I want to play bishop to d1. Just poke and prod a little bit. Now, if they make the mistake of playing something like bishop to d7, I think we'll just take and play f3, and our advantage would be quite substantial there. But now we get to remaneuver to f3, which is nice. And now we have to ask ourselves if we want to take. I think it's reasonable to want to take. Is there anything better, though? We can just bring our king in for the moment. So let's do this. Okay, I think this is actually just a mistake. Trading here looks quite good. And now we can just take on c6 there. And the problem is when we enter this king and pawn ending, sure, they can play f5, but they cannot avoid king d4. After king d4 comes, yeah, they're just one tempo short. If they could play f5 and c5 there, then maybe there was some chances. Here, there's simply none at all. Maybe they'll try e3, pitching a pawn, but that won't really work either, unfortunately. We'll just play g3. We can just wait them out of moves a little bit, but the big plan here is just to go b4, c4, and b5. And when we have this extra a pawn, we'll just book it for the g pawn. Now it's time to play up a little bit. and I don't want to give them an ounce of activity, so this is the way to do it. c4 prevents king to d5. These squares are covered. Now we can just win this pawn, and now we can also take there, but we don't need to take there. We can just go king to b5. This makes things a little bit easier. Our king is still active, whereas if we took and they played king c6, our king is not as active, and we could see ourselves easily not winning the game. So let's play c5. If king d5, we just push our a pawn. And otherwise, we move our king up. We just have to be careful that they don't play e3 or something. That could definitely happen. Lots of zugzwang tricks. If king a8, we can play c7, because after e3, we promote. We don't have to actually take it. It's good that they're trying this, though. So e3 or g5. Unfortunately, they have too many moves to be able to play, and we win the game. So that was a pretty good one. I think that went really smoothly, which is awesome. Let's change the analysis board now, and let's talk about it, because that's how we improve. Okay, so just a standard opening here. Nothing really went too crazy. We just went for just a normal looking position, and it's interesting that we're actually slightly worse here. Things did not really feel worse. This felt like a very equal position. So I kind of just want to override the computer in some ways there. C4 is not really the way to go. I think taking is quite interesting though, but it doesn't like it. I assume because of E takes, and we get just a really nice Carlsbad position. I'm not exactly sure how they continue here. It's just because when you look at the quality of the pieces, the only imbalance, like the thing is, there's no technical imbalance because, well, we have the same color bishops and we both have 2 knights. So there's 2 types of imbalances here. One is the c3 versus the c5 pawn. The other is the placement of the queens. But most importantly, it's the strength of the bishops. And our bishop just feels stronger here. The reason why I'm saying that, okay, and now that it's actually thinking a little bit longer, the position's going closer to equality, which I think is the right call there. Our bishop is better than theirs because their bishop is stuck on their own pawn color, essentially. So it has less mobility. So after c4, now white's pretty happy. Bishop c2. And yeah, the engine's climbing a little bit more. e5. And this was a bit of a mistake. So I was talking about how, for example, I thought it would be a mistake to take and then play e5, for example, here. And the reason why is because if we just, for example, trade everything, takes, knight to f3, and then we play knight to d4, doesn't really matter where they go, they can do the same thing. If they want to, with queen to h5, now it's a little bit worse for them because, again, it's just a weak pawn on d5 and nothing around it. They do have some defenses like bishop to e6 or b6, bishop b7 feels a lot looser, but bishop b6 is definitely a reasonable option. It's unlikely we'll just win the game, but this is kind of what you want when you're playing something like the London or generally even queen pawn openings in general with d4, is you're looking to just get some sort of a position like this where, yeah, it might be a draw if you give it to engines, but also we're not engines, right? Being stuck with a weakness like d5 where you can consistently attack it over and over and over again, eventually people start to make mistakes, and yeah, that's kind of what we want. And that's pretty much what happens after e5 is we enter a similar type of scenario where even though it's not an isolated pawn, there is a pawn beside it. There's no pawn able to protect it, so that also puts us in a pretty nice position here after knight to d4. Yeah, so queen h6, just bring the queen in, queen g3. I think h3 here is also good, but a4 is very solid. We don't really have to do anything immediate. The thing is, we're not going to win this position by force. as you can see, the engine gives just a very, very slight advantage to white, just one pawn's worth, and that's because of the quality of this pawn. So the way we're going to press in this position is kind of not run our opponent out of moves, but close to it. So a6, a5, just gaining a little bit more space. Knight h5, queen f3. So one thing to watch out for is queen h4 loses the game to g5. Our queen is actually trapped, and I almost played this, by the way. So it's good that we didn't, because I was preparing to play that if they played knight h5. So yeah, just queen f3, h3. Again, just very slow moves. And you can see that nothing's really changing the evaluation of the position too much. All of these moves are pretty decent, and that's kind of just what you're hoping for. Now, one thing that could be speculative here is the move queen f4. But luckily, the engine actually does seem to like it, which I'm very happy about. Here, I thought knight h5 could be interesting, but f5 is always playable, so there's not really a worry there of losing any material. Where after the bishop moves back, we can just play a move like g3 just to defend everything. We wouldn't really want to play g4 and just give them this f4 square for nothing. g3 is a lot smarter to kind of prevent the knight from getting active. And if the knight moves back, we just play moves like king g2, and we take over the a file, and we're good to go. Just a very slight, slim advantage, and we're very happy with that. So h4, again, so we can play g3 without the h-pawn hanging. So one thing we'd love to play here is g3, but bishop h3 is very annoying. As you can see, it's only a slight advantage for black, even though we're down a pawn. That's how bad this central structure is for our opponent. So rook e1. Rook to e2. I don't know if trading was completely necessary here, but that's what we ended up doing. And we're actually winning here. And I just realized we're winning because I missed something. So bishop e2, bishop d1 is the wrong way to go. There's actually bishop to f5 that I'm just realizing. And this is much stronger. Why is that? We're threatening this trade again, which does leave us into a completely winning position. But there's also another thing going on. We're just threatening to go bishop c8, which just wins everything on the queen side, and this pawn is just too far advanced. We'll just win very quickly. So this is the way to go. Instead, I went bishop to d1, which is not as good. As you can see, the engine hates it. Yeah, so we enter this position. I still think it's quite good, and knight e4 is definitely a huge blunder, because whenever you have kind of a weak structure, you should really fear going into any sort of king and pawn endings. Usually bad structures lead to bad king and pawn endings. It's very common because the king has more squares that it can use to kind of get an advantage from it. And of course, we just trade everything here, which is very forcing, and there's nothing to do. King e3, if they could play f5, g3, and then c5, all of a sudden it's an equal position. So if they had like one more move, then maybe they'd be okay. Of course, that's not what happened in the game. After king to e3 and f5, we just play king to d4, and the game is over. These c-pawns will fall, and there's nothing to really speak of at this point. It's just kind of a normal cleanup job where we just advance our pawns. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that game and the analysis that follows it. Remember, be very respectful of your pawns. Make sure that you don't have a bad bishop, and have fun playing chess. All right, bye guys.